Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 13th of July 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, we're delighted that we'll be joined today by Alex Thomson. Of course, Alex speaking from the Netherlands as Easter approaches. And a special day, Mike.
It is a special day. It's a special day because the Great Repeal Bill, which is no longer the Great Repeal Bill, it was then renamed to just the Repeal Bill, and now it's called the EU Withdrawal Bill. And apparently, Theresa May, David Davis, pretty concerned about this because they think they're going to get a big reaction from opposition parties, and that seems to be what opposition parties are saying. Don't say we didn't warn that this was exactly what was going to happen, because these are all delaying tactics. So MPs, are they going to work together? I don't think so. David Davis said that he will work with anyone to make sure it's a success, Brian. So that's good news. Tim Farron said that this will be hell this next several months as they debate this bill. And the Labour Party said that they would act against this legislation unless there are going to be changes. So clearly there are going to be lots of amendments to this bill. Now, what are they going to do? Well, of course, the Great Repeal Bill isn't repealing anything. It is not a repatriation, as Wikipedia would have you believe. It's a patriation of laws, bringing European legislation onto the British domestic statute books. The only law that it actually repeals is the European Communities Act. So that makes it the Great Repeal Bill, apparently. But The Independent tweeted this out earlier on today, and it said the government is about to give itself powers to scrap your rights without a vote in Parliament. So what is it actually going to do? Well, first of all, as we've mentioned, repeal the European Communities Act. Second, it's going to convert EU legislation into UK domestic legislation. And thirdly, it's going to create powers which make powers to make secondary legislation. So in that sense, the Independent has it on the nail here, in the sense that secondary legislation generally doesn't get parliamentary oversight. Yes, okay, they lay a statutory instrument on the table in Parliament, but there's never anybody there to look at it, so there's never any scrutiny or any discussion of it. Lots of stuff coming out of the woodwork here, Mike, because of course we're seeing very little debate in Parliament on anything of importance. And of course, we could take military action overseas as being one of the biggest. That if David Cameron and a small small team decided behind closed doors that there would be an attack on Syria, that was it. So all of a sudden, we're worried that stuff is not going to be debated in Parliament. Well, indeed. So, Alex, two issues here. First of all, the issue of secondary legislation and the fact that this is potentially an enabling act, and therefore there is even recognition amongst opposition parties that seems to be the case. So they're going to delay things significantly. But the second point to make here from this tweet from the Independent is the government is about to give itself powers to scrap your rights. And of course, this is the core of my argument over the issue of human rights. This is my objection to human rights, because if our rights are given to us by human beings, if we give them that authority, then they have the right to take those rights away again.
Absolutely, Mike. Now, the first issue you raised there of the patriation as distinct from repatriation, in other words, making something part of our national law which wasn't, I attempted to address this in soundbitey fashion to one of the American journalists who are now interested in this. We've spoken to Joel Skousen, and in fact, on an Insight program with him, where he says he was one of the first in America to realize the deceit of Brexit, with Mrs May saying she was going to move the whole of the acquis communautaire, the EU's legal basis, into our primary legislation. And in a recent interview, if you look up WorldNet Daily and if you type in Brexit rebellion, you'll find me talking on one of the three soundbites there, together with one of the UKIP MEPs who's more aware of these things, Ray Finch. And we both say, look, we're going to end up worse than we were. because up till now, most of the EU stuff, the directives, as distinct from the regulations, the directives was just basically a suggestion sent from Brussels to governments, and it was up to us how to interpret them. Mostly they went in as statutory instruments, which are basically, other countries would call them ministerial decrees, but we're too English for that, so we call it a statutory instrument to fudge it, never going through Parliament. Now that stuff is going on the statute books. It's going to have a higher status once we've left the European Union, than it would do initially. So we're in a worse position, and Americans are starting to pick this up, as I say. And on that second point, the Independent article is referring to something called the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is not even an EU or precursor of the EU piece of legal ease. It's actually from the Council of Europe. Last time we mentioned that the European Union has two councils of its own in Brussels. There's a third in Strasbourg, which has nothing to do with the EU, and that's the body that's brought out this charter. And it's part of a piece of Churchill and Truman at the end of the war saying, OK, these lesser nations who are not clever enough to be Anglo-Saxons, such as continentals and natives as they gain their freedom, they're going to need basically a framework which we give them. And the thinking was we are above and beyond that. We have our common law. But now the two have blurred. So everything that is now blamed on the EU and Brexit is actually giving cover for the whole thinking of we will give you rights as governments and we'll take them away. That thinking is bleeding through into the common law countries which thought it up as a framework for the continent in the first place. So as with the first point I made, we've got this problem where rights have not been understood. They've been dormant for 3 generations. They haven't been asserted because we haven't taught them to our children. And now we're in a position where black can be sold as white.
Absolutely, very dangerous. Now, I'm going to go back to February 2016, and when David Cameron produced his Best of Both World documents, Alex, and his point was that he was presenting this as the terms of Britain's new relationship within a reorganised European Union. And what he was saying was that we would stay within the European Union and we would opt out of any European institutions that we didn't like. One of the real arguments that's going on over this so-called Great Repeal Bill is, well, the one European institution that they seem to have jumped on at the moment is Euratom, the European Atomic Regulator. And of course, but there are other organisations. There's Europol, there's airspace regulation, there's EU military integration, and so on. All the institutions that lots of people in the so-called opposition are saying we've got to stay in. And so the position, as I've said this before many times, since Theresa May started talking about this issue, the position that she is presenting is that we are leaving the European Union, but that we will opt into various European bodies as we see fit. And I'm struggling to see the difference. So this whole argument over the Great Repeal Bill and the amendments, the potential amendments to it, seem like smoke and mirrors to me.
Yes, Mike, there is no valid reason to stay in the EU and then opt out. Besides, if you've hopped off the bus once with the EU and then rejoin or reset your status to ordinary member later, as if you had joined as a new member, like an Eastern European country or a Mediterranean island that joined later, you no longer have the right to opt out. Those rights are grandfathered basically only for the countries, and they're basically Britain, Ireland, and Denmark in most cases that want opt-outs from certain parts of the EU's undertakings. Those opt-outs are no longer available. So clearly, to make a clean break is better. Now, as for the Euratom issue, which was debated yesterday in Westminster Hall, which is a kind of side chamber of Parliament, there are some real worries there that, as David Ellis has already said in our chat box, this could spill over into the existing plan for the French and ultimately the Germans to get hold of our fissile material. Now, I know nuclear and civil and military nuclear are very distinct kettles of fish, but the expertise does come together in the end, and the stuff, the actual uranium and plutonium, uranium in our case, is rare. And the protocols for them do need careful control. But all of this is done internationally by treaty on a state-to-state basis anyway. It's not the case that you're going to lose your infrastructure. Euratom was like the Coal and Steel Pact. It was one of the initial treaties back in the 50s, which deliberately sought to make countries unable to operate or have an independent military or energy policy. And that is the core issue which the Bank for International Settlements and everyone under it, the World Bank and the IMF and the central bankers, desperately want to preserve. Because at that level, when you're talking about really the raw materials of energy and military, they wish to bundle those together whether we're in or out of the EU, so that there's enough of a currency weight behind them. You see, it's basically an economic argument, and all the arguments that we're going to lose our health and safety standards if we're out are nonsense, because there's plenty of countries in Europe that aren't even in Euratom, let alone the EU, and they manage just fine.
Yeah. Now you mentioned treaties, and of course one of the treaties is the treaty with the border with Northern Ireland, which existed before entry into the European Union. But some of these treaties are significantly older than the one you've just mentioned.
Yes. So here we have the issue of the Prime Minister of Flanders, the federal unit within Belgium, which looks after the Dutch speakers, and it's basically a proto-government. It's even more autonomous than the Scottish government in some ways. The Prime Minister of that, Geert Bourgeois, or the Premier to give him his proper title, because they have so many titles in Belgium, he turned up on television, as you see on the next slide, and rolled very ceremoniously what was sold as a decree from 1666, the year of the Great Fire and the Sestuique Vie Act, just after the Restoration. And as you can see there, he rolls out this thing and says, look, the Brits have left the 1964 Fisheries Convention, but we still have the right to fish in British waters. And the journalist says, are you sure, with a 17th century document? He says, yes. But even as the headline on that slide said, it is not a treaty, it is a privilege. This is a kind of document from 17th century law, when there was still personal rule by the Stuarts and other absolutist monarchs, that basically said, in this case, I'm very grateful to the people of Bruges for putting me up when my father had his head chopped off and Cromwell threw me out, and in response I'll give 50 fishermen the right to shelter in a storm. But they're so desperate now, the Belgians, to keep fishing in British waters, the same applies to the Dutch and French and so on, and Spaniards, that they're clutching at straws now to say, look, we have this deal. It's basically a way of mocking and undermining the British government in the negotiations. But as you see here, I was thinking of another tweet there, but I did tweet back to Bourgeois saying, of course, this doesn't apply because it was lost for 3 centuries, so it's fallen into de juritude.
Yes. Well, let's move on to EU military then. And Roger Helmer, a couple of days ago, Alex, tweeted out, I just attended a lunch briefing on the European Defence Fund and Common Defence Planning. So he had his briefing on July the 11th. I think we briefed our viewers and listeners on this about a month ago, if I remember rightly. So he's a bit behind the curve. But he said that's the EU army we've been promised wouldn't happen. And you've responded to him by saying you were warned about this by David Ellis a long time ago and ran away from him. Ditto when Brian Gerrish briefed you on Common Purpose. So Roger Helmer not really paying attention, it seems.
No, and I'm seeing in the chat box here from one of our loyal viewers who's a UKIP man that Roger Helmer has retired as a member of the European Parliament. So I think that what that means is he won't be contesting the 2019 Parliament. But Helmer, I'm afraid, is a deeply disappointing man, and that's the weakest I can put it. Perhaps Brian would like to chip in here, because on the separate issue of Common Purpose, Helmer actually shared a platform with Brian. And after the meeting, when Brian had laid out exactly what Common Purpose was doing to all our public institutions, I believe he scarpered, just as he did when David Ellis tried to tackle him on military union.
Well, that's exactly right. This was many years ago. I gave one of my early talks on Common Purpose, all factually based. It was based on documents. I believe it was Coventry or somewhere like that, but Roger Helmer chaired the meeting. And when I finished speaking, many people were coming forward asking me questions. And then when I looked to see where the chairman was, he disappeared. And he never responded to any phone calls or emails or letters after that time. But I did hear allegations that he tried to say that he didn't want to deal with me because I was a racist. But he scarpered, basically, at the mention of Common Purpose.
Good stuff. Now, Alex, what is going on with the German Navy?
Well, this is from the website germanforeignpolicy.com. For those listening in audio, it's german-foreign-policy.com. And these chaps, who are clearly against military integration and NATO EU links, fish out the best stuff, or the most telling stuff, from German military journals. And here they're identifying that the German Navy, as reported in its own basically in-house journal, Marine something I think the title is, in the May 2017 edition, they have a Rear Admiral of the German Navy writing that they have ordered 5 new corvettes basically to dominate the Eastern Baltic. So it's part of the saber rattling against Russia. We're now seeing that this is more than an EU policy. It's a Berlin-driven policy. Goes back to 1915 and the policy of Middle Europa that Germany must have control over the Baltic and Poland in order to suck the natural resources and human labour out of those countries. So the policy is reviving. And again, perhaps Brian might want to comment. What can 5 new corvettes do?
Well, this is a very good question. Of course, if they were Russian corvettes, what they could do would be very dependent on the new generation of missiles that the Russians have got. And they've shown that they're prepared to put very powerful missile systems on board relatively small ships. Have the Germans got those sorts of systems? No, they haven't. So the question is, I think this is posturing. But of course, I think it's also the Germans cocking a snoop at us, because the Royal Navy's in such a pitiful position at the moment that the Germans always keen to say, well, actually, we do have a navy. But perhaps we can move from that to this one. Now, this is back on the 23rd of June 2017 after the Paris Air Show. But Defence News here saying that German officials had met with Lockheed to talk about the possibility of Germany taking on the F-35. Now, we heard a couple of hours ago that Russia Today was apparently reporting that President Trump was saying, yes, this deal is going to be on. I couldn't find information to support that, and I don't know whether you've seen anything, Alex, to say that the Germans are now going to take on the F-35. Why they should want to do that, I have no idea.
I don't think that they actually need to order the F-35, Brian, because the Dutch have made great shakes about ordering their squadron of F-35s. And as we all know, the Germans control the Dutch military now. So why do they need to buy their own?
That's a good question.
Okay, we'll stop there with a smile on our faces and see how that develops.
Yes.
But matters defence, you have to be extremely careful about what we're seeing reported in the press at the moment. This was sent through to me. It's the Scottish Herald, and the story is that a rising number of Russian naval vessels have been detected in UK waters, including submarines caught, quote, lurking near the Faslane nuclear-armed submarine base. A foreign affairs think tank has found, we'll come on to that, and the Russian submarines were thought to be attempting to identify the acoustic signature of Britain's Vanguard-class submarines. Now, this is a story, it's a non-story. Where's it come from? Well, the red arrow there pointing to the source, which is the Henry Jackson Society. So the Russians have been doing this for years and years and years in exactly the same way that the Royal Navy, when it had the units capable of doing it, and certainly the US Navy, was constantly snooping on the Russian military bases to get as much intelligence material as possible. So nothing new here, but this has been pushed out by Henry Jackson Society, I think, to help ramp up the current Russian situation. Russia is the bad man at the moment. So I've called this fake news constructed on the back of selected facts and storytelling. Where's it come from? Well, it's come from this man, Dr. Andrew Foxall, from the Henry Jackson Society. He's very big on Eastern Europe and Russia and military matters, apparently. But this is a really poor article. But if you go and have a look at what the Henry Jackson Society is about, it is simply a group of liberals who say that our democracies are wonderful and the whole world should adopt the same type of democracies as the US and the UK. If I just scroll up on this one paragraph I wanted to highlight. The Henry Jackson Society believes that only modern liberal democratic states are truly legitimate, and that the political or human rights pronouncements of any international regional organisation which admits undemocratic states lack the legitimacy to which they will be entitled if their members were democracies. So this is a group of people who've set themselves up to say, we are right, and if you don't agree with the way we run our countries, then you're clearly undemocratic, and essentially we're going to take you over.
Good stuff. Let's move on to more snooping, Brian, and GCHQ. Well, the GCHQ call is open, apparently. Here we go. They are urging applications for groundbreaking cybersecurity scheme. This programme is integral, apparently, an integral part of developing the UK's cybersecurity capability, which is now worth £22 billion, that market. And so what they're doing is bringing together GCHQ and industry expertise to develop new cybersecurity technologies. And this, 22 billion plus is what the size of the market is. So the call is open, according to the website. It's being run by this company, Wayra UK, along with the NCSC, GCHQ, and the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, as it has been rebranded. Matt Hancock, the Minister for Digital, said, "We're working hard to make Britain the best place to start and grow digital businesses and the safest place to be online. GCHQ's Cyber Accelerator is a vital part of this work and has already helped some of the most innovative cybersecurity startups develop cutting-edge new products and services." Alex, I've got to ask the question, is it legal for the government to hawk out GCHQ in this way?
Well, I think that the press release you sent me earlier today from gov.uk might clearly crosses the line into illegal, if not unlawful, behaviour, and hence we're bordering on treason or misprision of treason here, because the press release is clearly touting privileged access to businesses for cash to intelligence officers. Now, GCHQ is both poacher and gamekeeper, and it is the gamekeeper part of the equation which is here. It used to be called the Communications and Electronic Security Group, CESG, but it has a wealth of other names now. They seem to have a new name every week: Cheltenham Cookhouse, National Cybersecurity Centre, whatever they call themselves, and they have a presence down in central London now, in Victoria as well, in a brand new building. But no, this is basically touting to access to intelligence officers, and I was really quite bamboozled in that press release to see how much of a role this Wayra, W-A-Y-R-A, Wayra UK would have in basically running the scheme. I don't know how they overlap with Open Future, the company with the odd squiggle you showed on that video, but they both questionable outfits. Wayra is a British subsidiary of a Latin American telecoms company, which was taken over by Telefonica of Spain. So it's one of these new generation rising second world countries taking over our infrastructure again, in this case telecommunications. There was a huge amount of worry about Huawei of China, owned by the Chinese army, majority owned, and how much of a stake they had in our telephony, including for the intelligence agencies. And this seems a step further. We've got Latin American Marxist countries basically running a scheme with GCHQ officers.
Well, there you go.
It doesn't fill me with confidence. We are monitoring the world for a terrorist threat we are helping to fund. Meanwhile, at home, we can't guarantee the safety of people in fires. So we've had Grenfell Tower. This is a very interesting report, again from the Scottish Herald, that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow has now been found to be clad with dangerous panels. So this one's going to be interesting to follow through. And I'll just add that this hospital is known locally as the Death Star. It's particularly ugly when you see it, but now we know there are risks.
So what else is going on, Brian?
Well, let's come through to this one, which is The Guardian saying that there are 9 simple ways to save the NHS. And they've done this by simply inviting their readers to tell them how it should be done. So we've got everything from charging drunk people for using services, fining people for appointments they miss, making people pay. What else have we got? Bring back training bursaries, introduce, there we are, the nominal charge to access services, and make doctors' surgeries open longer. So this is the depth of Guardian analysis on the problems in the NHS at the moment. It's truly pitiful. This is the journalist, Sarah Johnson. She's apparently analysed nothing. And we just like to say that it doesn't take much to see what was actually coming. Here's the plot against the NHS. And this has had a review by a Guardian journalist. This is a book from some years ago saying you must read this book. So it's quite clear that the NHS is being taken apart from the inside, but this lady journalist can't seem to understand that. We could throw another book at her. This is the Arthur Selden report from 1968 saying what is going to happen after the NHS. So clearly the destruction of the NHS planned. And then, of course, we've got stuff like this, Privatising the World, by Oliver Letwin, with a preface by John Redwood. And of course, if you go to UK Column, we have been warning about the role of common purpose inside the NHS and those change agents. Now, that was the start of our article on 1 million change agents inside the NHS. It was a quote by Robert Rowland Smith: "For change to work, the discontent with the present must be greater than the tolerance of it." And this, we suggest, is the baseline to taking apart the NHS. This lady, if you have a look at her Twitter page, also touches on children being taken away with no proper substance to the reporting. And then this one I found really fascinating. She's promoting these 3 young, I would take it to be Muslim girls. This is from Indonesia, and she's very excited because they're promoting heavy metal bands. They've now formed their own sort of what does she call it, thrash metal band, but it's based on groups like Rage Against the Machine and Slipknot. And if you're not aware of Slipknot, there's a picture of the sort of style of their productions. And if I read you this bit, they have specialised in horror-themed imagery, hiding their identities behind masks. Performances feature extreme acts such as stage dives from high balconies and projectile vomiting. So this is the standard of The Guardian, which claims that it's investigating what's going on with the NHS. This is truly pathetic, Mike.
Yes. Okay. This evening, Ian Crane is in the studio once again. Humanity versus Insanity will have Dr. Graham Downing as the guest. So look forward to that at 7:30 p.m. tonight on the live stream. And at 9 p.m. He will be back with Fracking Nightmare as usual, and we'll have the news programme repeated in between that. As usual now, Mosul, we've been talking about Mosul over the last couple of days and the hypocrisy over that. Well, apparently Britain is sending some life-saving aid to Mosul to help the people rebuild their homes, their city, their lives. And that's according to International Development Secretary Priti Patel. And this follows the declaration of Mosul's liberation after 3 years under ISIS control. So the UK is going to provide shelter kits and household items to 74,000 people, healthcare to more than 115,000 people, including a trauma hospital to treat victims of ISIS, safe drinking water for more than 150,000 people, and sanitation for over 100,000 people in camps. And Brian, I'm confused about this really because I don't really know why we're providing some gear for a certain number of people and other gear for a different number of people. Does that mean that some people have to miss out on shelter? Some people don't need shelter, is that it? And other people don't need healthcare, and some people don't need sanitation compared to drinking water. How does this work?
I've no idea, Mike, and I think the problem with this is you can't see anything sensible because it's not real. This is just a propaganda tool that Britain is actually putting in aid, but there's no proper aid going in, therefore the figures and the help going in doesn't make sense. I believe the population of Mosul is somewhere around 640, 660,000 people, so this is a relatively small effort. We've been helping the terrorists who've been causing the destruction there in the first place. Now you put in the token effort of aid. It doesn't make sense because it's not real.
Where's the money going? That is the question. And of course, that is the question the government doesn't want to answer. So what did Priti Patel have to say? She said, Mosul's liberation is a great victory for the people of Iraq who have shown extraordinary bravery and a great stride forward in global security. However, the horrific actions of Daesh mean the humanitarian situation in Mosul remains very serious. The UK has been at the forefront of the humanitarian response, and we will continue to stand by the people of Iraq as the painstaking work begins to rebuild homes and infrastructure in Mosul, as well as lasting peace for the city. This latest support from Britain will mean the difference between life and death for people who have suffered under Daesh. It will allow people to rebuild their lives in their home city, and it will support the government of Iraq's effort to build a stable, secure and prosperous Iraq. And of course, they didn't make any such comment when East Aleppo was liberated from the same type of people, and they didn't make anything. They didn't make any kind of humanitarian gesture at that time.
No.
So,
but the Henry Jackson Society has explained that, Mike, because this is not a proper it's not. Syria wasn't in the proper country. It wasn't a liberal
democracy.
Western democracy. Therefore, it wasn't a proper country. Therefore, it wouldn't be supported. But Iraq has now been bombed into the proper sort of liberal country, so we can put the aid in. That's how it works, I think.
Well, Alex, of course, one of the problems that Priti Patel's money is causing as she pumps her aid into various countries is war, and therefore immigration, migrants being driven out of their countries. And here is an article saying basically that Austria has sealed off the Brenner Pass as non-governmental organisation boats are landing thousands of migrants in Italy.
Yes, it's from earlier in the month. It's about 10 days old or so now. But Kronenzeitung is a regional paper in Austria, which is known in the German-speaking world for being the only print title and mainstream online title that even talks roughly about the problems of forced migration and bogus asylum seeking. And particularly, it points a finger towards what the Italians down on the ground are actually saying now, which is that the NGOs appear to have not just channels of communication with the what should we say, the people traffickers operating from the Libyan coast. They seem to have actual agreements with them to import quotas, and we know at a minimum that a lot of these boats are being drifted out with just enough fuel to get people out into Libyan territorial waters. Then the engine is removed from the back of the boat, the people are left drifting, and the traffickers go back ashore. And so we have many examples of this now. Surveys in Italian press from March show that a third of voters agreed with the statement that the NGOs are deliberately coming to agreements with traffickers, and another third said that there is occasional contact. Thank you for scrolling down the article there. You can see the Brenner Pass, the famous border between Italy and Austria, with the tanks. Now, I've spoken to a knowledgeable Austrian contact who says this may have actually been overhyped for the purposes of scaring off migrants, that the protection at the border may be actually less than is being alleged here. But it's a very hot theme, this NGO business. And if you look at my Twitter account, among others, I'm one of those who have started engaging with the worst offenders like MSF. That's Médecins Sans Frontières, and they have an account MSFC, as in SEAC, which is the branch that imports the fake migrants or the bogus migrants, whatever you want to call them, desperately exploited people. And I know that in their lands of origin, they're often forced to flee by men at gunpoint so that they can form part of this traffic. Others are the Institute of Migration, and it's gratifying to see the overwhelming number of tweets responding to these people who daily push out this arrogant stuff, saying we're the best people in the world, saving these poor innocent refugees, pointing out the many flaws. Here, for example, is a tweet of one German chap who says that we rarely see this picture. There is a boat full of the migrants whom we usually see without any context in a marine picture. There is an NGO boat drawing alongside them. I think this one's too small to take them on. It's a coordinating vessel to do a bit of recceing. But look in the background, that's the Cyrenaica coast of Libya. So that's how far out these chaps are allowed to come, and they are 90% men of military age. They're just a few hundred yards, maybe a nautical mile out from sea before these NGOs pounce. So there's got to be some dodgy dealing there. Even a New York Times article has shown a graphic that each year since 2014, the average location in which these people are rescued has drifted southwards from waters between Italy, Malta, and Libya, right down to just off the Libyan coast. They're now being rumbled. One thing I'll say is that Martin Sellner, Sellner, has actually decided, although he's an Austrian from a landlocked country, he's actually bought a boat and he's going to captain it to actually intercept these vessels and make sure that the NGOs don't smuggle more people in.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Now, George Soros is not having much fun in Hungary, or at least his images aren't. We have a little bit of video clip here. Just tell us about this.
Well, the Hungarian government has put up, for the very reason we were just discussing, these posters saying, watch out for Soros, don't let him win. And look at the hatred. He's being given devil's eyes and a bleeding fanged mouth. And most of the posters have been defaced with words like horrible man and how we hate him and so on. In this one, a Hungarian has written the face of evil, or rather the commentator who's taking it is saying the face of evil. These are all over the Budapest metro and out on billboards on the streets along the Budapest boulevards now. And the best that Soros and his stooges can do is say that this is anti-Semitic by the government. Well, there's no reference to Soros being a Jew in the posters. He does evil simply by what he does.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But this is a demonstration of the power of people once they can see where the problem is coming from. Obviously, Soros is part of the problem, but a big part because of the billions or trillions that he can put into political wheeling and dealing. But what this shows me is that people now are beginning to see what this man is up to, and this relatively silent protest is very effective.
Yeah. Moving on to Ireland then, Alex, and this article from the Irish Times, this is an American blogger, I believe. Blogger considers legal action over Garda caution at airport.
Now, this lady is from County Tyrone in Northern Ireland, but like all Northern Irish people, she's entitled to an Irish passport, and I believe she has one. But anyway, she settled in New York, and she was on a visit to the Republic of Ireland from New York. And there must have been a passport warning out for her, because she was taken aside by Gardaí, Irish Republic Police, at Dublin Airport, boarding a flight back home, and was told, a government minister doesn't like what you've been blogging about her and writing on social media. It's harassment. She doesn't like it. You must stop. And so a couple of socialist TDs, Irish MPs, have raised this in Parliament as a shocking abuse, which of course it is. But it shows really that if there's an airport watch out for people just because they've written about the apparently untoward behaviour of Irish ministers, then we're at the same level of corruption as Britain, really. Particularly the lines between the police, as we've seen in previous cases involved in Ireland, the police and the political authorities. Those lines seem to be non-existent now. It's all blurred into one.
Alex, the Irish, I think this happened at Dublin Airport, and of course in Dublin Airport, the US immigration are already have a position there, and you effectively go through US immigration before you board the plane. Is there any chance that her problems actually derive from the US?
That is actually a possibility, because if the minister in question was really hacked off and got an underling to find out that the lady was a US citizen or resident, then it could be that she tipped off those people. And of course, when you go back to the US, and I don't know the nationalities of the lady in question, whether she's a green card holder or an actual US citizen, but when you go back to the US, of course, you have to provide lots of details about yourself. And so that could be that the US authorities had picked that up indeed.
But anyway, it was the Garda that actually arrested her. In the meantime, we have heard over a long period of time allegations regarding the Irish police, the Garda, and this article here: fabricated evidence and false testimony by Garda in the Jobstown protest trial. Just give us a little bit of background to Jobstown before you discuss this particular issue.
Yes, it has many legs to it, Jobstown, but basically it was a group that didn't like the then Deputy Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, who is called Joan Burton, who has been abominably arrogant in the Dáil in Parliament, as well as in her policies in defending them in TV studios. So her car was sort of surrounded in the way that often left-wing protests are these days. And the core of the matter is, did Gardaí, so Irish policemen, lie under oath and in a coordinated fashion about what they had seen, because the charges were false imprisonment, and from Enda Kenny, the then Taoiseach or Prime Minister, downwards, the whole Irish establishment, including the Children's Commissioner, the Canadian lady whom we've tried to approach on previous cases, actually came out as one man and woman and said Joan Burton was subject to false imprisonment, and the Gardaí in court testified, I heard the protesters saying, let's keep her here overnight. And yet during the jury trial, thank God there are still jury trials in Ireland, it was seen from helicopter footage that Gardaí in the helicopter was saying, oh, look at these guys, they'll be gone before long. And the page you just showed has a link to lots of transcripts in which people can read just the details of how many policemen perjured themselves in coordinated fashion. I'm beginning to think that there must be some kind of common purpose network in Ireland now, otherwise there wouldn't be this degree of coordination.
Yeah.
Well, there's a very well-developed common purpose network, Alex, and I'm pleased to say that people in Ireland are now doing the research into who the members are. But yes, we're seeing the effects in the public administration. Well, if justice is falling apart, let's have a look at this report from the National Audit Office, which is pointing a finger at the Ministry of Justice, and said that a project for a massive expansion of electronic monitoring using GPS was unproven. Well, this is a pretty gentle way of saying that the Ministry of Justice wasted a minimum of 60 million of public money, much of it paid to Capita and other organisations. What was reported was that, let's have a look at this, it says it was a new generation electronic monitoring programme which is estimated to cost 130 million by 2024-25. The service itself is apparently now expected to cost 470 million between 2017 and 2024-5. There's some, it's a little bit difficult to get in amongst the figures on that, Mike, but what we know is a vast amount of money has been wasted. Now, this is Amias Morse from the head of the National Audit Office. He said the case for a huge expansion of electronic monitoring using GPS was unproven, but they pursued an overtly ambitious and high-risk strategy anyway. Ultimately, it was not delivered. They abandoned the original plans. The ministry's new service will now, ironically, be much closer to its existing one. So they've spent a huge amount of money. They're back in the same place. Even if it launches in 2018, it will be 5 years late. The ministry has learnt costly lessons from its failings. Now, I find that quite extraordinary. He goes on to say this, which is contracts were not signed until July 2014 due to the discovery of overbilling by G4S and Serco, followed by 2 failed procurements for the tags. The ministry has now appointed G4S as preferred bidder. So I've just added there, overbilling was just incompetence, possibly a bit of fraud, but either way, G4S, who was involved in that, is an ideal candidate to pick up more free money.
Yeah, so they were discovered fraudulently that they were putting in.
Well, it could have been a mistake, Mike. It could have been a mistake.
What, that they didn't know that the people they were invoicing for were dead?
Well, possibly.
Possibly, right.
Yeah.
So they committed this mistake, and they were suspended while there was an investigation going on, and then they were eventually sanctioned for that. So they were effectively found guilty, but now they're preferred bidder again.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this is within the Ministry of Justice. So, of course, what we're seeing is there is no justice as public money is squandered as a minimum, and those doing it are rewarded with more contracts. But the underlying message at the moment from the British government is fear. And this one was pointed out. I thought it was a really fine article by The Sun. Know the law. Parents warned they could be arrested if they get too drunk while looking after their children this summer. So I've captioned that, ramp up the fear, drink and the state takes your children. Mm-hmm. Fear and more fear. They've got commentary from this lady, from a lady solicitor, also from the Law Society. There's a little bit of a spelling mistake on her Twitter page, but I'm sure that doesn't mean it's fake news. Basically, she had this to say: the threshold would be whether the child was compromised. If you're having lunch with a couple of glasses of wine, you probably wouldn't be considered drunk in charge of a child. Probably. If you're obviously impaired, if it's a child who needs you to be alert and capable of safeguarding them, then that will be the real test. She said parents of young children needed to be fully alert to protect them from physical harm, such as running into the road or climbing on things. And she said parents might be arrested on suspicion of the offence, but their case would be passed to social services and prosecutions were rare. So this is all mixed message stuff. It's all based on fear. It's obviously quite an old law. It tends to be used more these days in child protection and child care law. So you're having a drink, you've got to be fearful that somebody could report you to social services.
Yes. We'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there. Okay. Alex, thank you very much for joining us as always. I'll say to our audience today, don't fall into this fear trap. The objective at the moment of the government is to make us fearful on all fronts while they carry out the criminal activity, whether it's overseas wars, using aid for propaganda purposes, or simply handing out public money to these vast corporations for what can probably be described as a minimum of shoddy work. What can we do about it? Well, take a leaf out of the people pointing to those posters on George Soros. It's up to all of us to say, no, we're not accepting it, and to highlight the people in government who are failing at the moment. That's it from us today. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, perhaps you'd consider making a subscription or a donation, because we can only do what we do with your financial help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.